and welcome to episode 3 of Cyber from the Frontlines. And today we are going to talk about ransomware. And to walk us through that, I would like to welcome Ryan Chapman. I'm so glad that we are able to do this today. And now you don't need any introduction, but for folks that are new to cyber, if you could just give an insight into what you do, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So first off, thank you for having me. My name is Ryan, and I am the author of the SANS. There you go. Got the shirt. If I
Yeah.
can point to it properly. Forensics 528 Ransomware and Cyber Extortion course. And my course basically goes over all things ransomware, from prevention to detection to hunting to all these types of things. So it took about a good year and a half to put together a 4-day course. And in that time, I ramped up my research efforts for ransomware like crazy. And I've been working as an incident response consultant for about 5 years now. So I've worked a lot of ransomware cases, whether I led those cases or whether I jumped in and was helping with various tasks or, work lead management type of stuff within those cases. I've been dealing with ransomware for a long time now, and I can't stand ransomware. I hate it, but I also love it because I love talking about it, and I love trying to teach people like why it's a problem and why the numbers keep going up and up and up and up and up. And I currently work now as a threat hunter. And so I've moved into a threat hunting position where we're constantly looking through our client tenants and finding, nefarious things. And I've been doing DFIR for about 12 years now, I think, something like that. And yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
That's great. I didn't know that you are doing threat hunting as well, because that's part of what I do as well where I work. So good to know that. So we can exchange our notes and things like that. So that's great. Additionally, I also know that you also lead a hackers conference in Arizona, known
I
as.
used to. I recently had to step down from the lead because it was just too much. I was working way too much. I mean, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I did that for a couple of years, and it was too much. But there's a conference in Arizona in the United States called CactusCon, which is actually coming up
Yeah.
this February. I said this February. It already is February. What am I talking about? Oh no. I'm losing track of time. Is it the 16th and 17th? I'm looking at my other screen here.
Welcome to the 2020s.
I
Basically.
know. Tell me about it. It is February 16th and 17th. And so while I may not be I'm not the lead anymore, it's still my baby. And it's a wonderful conference. Ever since COVID hit in 2020 and we had our first conference in 21, we've been streaming all of our sessions and things of that nature. So you can go to cactuscon.com and look, at the archives and go find our YouTube stuff. But yeah, definitely plan on attending. If virtually is perfectly fine. If you want to come on out to Mesa, Arizona, which is about, I'd say 30 minutes east of Phoenix, Arizona. Everyone was like, where's the conference? I say Mesa. And they go, where? I'm like, it's in Phoenix. It's in Phoenix. But we have some really heavy hitting talks this year. I still say we, like I'm directly involved, but I'm on the call for papers board still, and so I get to help select the talks that we're gonna do, and it's just a great time.
Awesome. That's good to know. And I read your blogs a lot. I follow you. So I'm really, really glad that you are on the show as well. So glad to have you. So let's begin with understanding the different ransomware attack vectors that lead to ransomware deployment. So from your perspective, what are the different types of infection vectors that lead to that? And also, in your opinion, what would be the most important, most common infection vector that you are observing these days?
Yes, so the big three, as we call it, are RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, that's open to the internet and does not have MFA enabled. And that's unfortunate because Microsoft does offer, if you're in Azure land, at least methodologies for implementing MFA to RDP.
Mhm.
And then we have good old phishing, good old classic phishing, which the two have like jockeyed for position over the years in terms of the number one.
Mhm.
infection vector. And then number three is software vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So for software vulnerabilities, it all goes back to the same old thing that we've been, the royal we, I'm sure yourself included, have been telling people for years now, is you have to minimize your patch cycles, make sure you're patching not just software internally, but also external network appliances and things of that nature. Like right now, there's a 0 day. Technically, it was a 0 day, and now there's a patch for it. So in my mind, I say it's not a 0 day anymore. But for Ivanti products, nothing against them. It just happens to be their time of the year where it was a whoops, their VPN products became susceptible
Yeah.
to exploitation. And so those are the three main ways that these ransomware actors are getting into environments. They're
Mhm.
also using what are known as initial access brokers, or IABs, which is I guess, a sub realm of the threat actor
Mhm.
network, if you will, out there. The business, technically, it's all business, right? Technically. And these initial access brokers are getting into environments very heavily via what are known as info stealers. So an info stealer, which back in the day, back in 2012, 13, 14, if you had like Hansitter or Imitet or IcedID or Botbot or whatever in your environment, it wasn't really that big of a problem. It was like, well, that user probably had their banking credentials exposed. Like, it's not that big of a deal. We'll go ahead and just rebuild that machine and move on with life. Well, not anymore. These IABs are working very closely with the ransomware groups, and so they're feeding them credentials. And so we'll have ransomware cases where all of a sudden a rogue machine just pops up on the VPN. It just logs in, no brute forcing required, just logs in. And we're like, ooh, uh-oh.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful if your antivirus, your EDR, or whatever says, hey, there's an info stealer in your environment. You have to be very, very careful about what credentials may have been taken out of your environment, because those can be used for entry by a ransomware group, and you don't want that.
Yeah. Agreed. I also noticed, like, since last year, there have been a lot of instances of compromise through the third party, through the supply chain, and we have been handling a lot of that. It's been like nonstop. Every other week there's something new coming up. So yeah, it's ransomware is really killing it.
Yeah, there was a 73% increase
Mm.
between 2022 and 2023 of ransomware incidents.
Wow.
So the number, I have an article out actually via SANS. I'll look it up real quick since I can't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, 73%.
Mhm.
In 2023, there were 4,611 cases that were reported by the ransomware actors themselves, as in on their data leak sites, which is where they go to say, hey, we compromised so and so, and we want the world to know. And if they don't pay us, the world's really going to know, kind of thing. And that's compared to a much lower number of 2,662 in 2022. So those numbers, it may not seem like a huge number, 4,600 cases, right? But that's a pretty big number. And the impact on a single organization can trickle down to, just like you mentioned, you can have not only additional access via what we sometimes call either upstream or downstream attacks. If I get into company A, who are their vendors, who are their partners, who are their, whatever it might be, joint ventures or something like that, and they might get into them, or they might get credentials for them and then cause problems for them. And there's just been this massive increase, and there's a couple of reasons why we're seeing that, but unfortunately those reasons are going to extend into 2024. At least that's my prediction. I think we're going to have even higher numbers. And by the way, for January of 2024, we already have higher numbers than we had for 2023. So that's not a good sign.
That's really not a good sign.
No.
So following up on that, uh, what is the typical ransomware attack chain that you see or observe in the regions that you investigate?
Very similar. Ever since about 2015, 16, they've adopted the same attack methodologies that we find, or that have previously found and still find now, with advanced persistent threat attacks. And it's a full-scale attack where they get into the environment via some type of initial vector, like we just talked about. And then once they're there, it's execution. They're trying to run commands. Typically, it's for discovery and enumeration. and know that we're just trying to find out, what account they're logged in with, what user groups exist if they're in a Windows environment, for example, or even Linux, what groups exist, what level of access to the system they have, and then trying to find other systems within the environment, potentially for lateral movement. But before they'll do that, they'll typically establish persistence.
Mm,
And that persistence can be something as simple in Windows realm as like a scheduled task or a service or just a run key, something simple in the registry, like a standard run key is we see that all the time. They'll use some more nefarious things like a C2 framework, a command and control framework, which will be something like the Sliver framework, or it'll be Cobalt Strike, or they'll be using Empire, formerly known as PowerShell Empire, something to allow themselves to get back into the environment should the user log out, the machine reboot, whatever the case may be. And then typically from there, they'll try to escalate their privileges and or acquire additional credentials within the environment. We see tools like Mimikatz being used extremely commonly, and we'll even see them just like via an RDP session, right? Once they've established it, they'll just open up a browser and go to github.com and just download mimikatz_trunk.zip and just run it from there. We see that all the time. They like to bring tools in via cloud services these days, where they just either use a curl or a wget
mm,
invocation, or they just literally open a browser and they go to file sharing websites to which previously they have uploaded their tool set, their little toolbox, that they want to bring into the environment. And for anyone listening, if you go to for528.com, which is my website URL shortener for my class, if you go to for528.com/LOTS, it stands for Living Off of Trusted Sites. And you'll find this just wonderful list of a bunch of file sharing sites. Things like dropmefiles.com. That
uh,
should be blocked in your environment. Don't allow that in your environment. Temp.sh. Don't allow that in your environment. Like block that. Block and alert on that. Don't just block it. Alert when there's an attempt on that too, whether it's firewall logs or whatever it might be.
mm,
Reason being, they want to upload their files and then just open a browser and just download them. And that also extends to a lot of these are trusted sites. So for example, I'm going to pick one randomly here because I heard about it earlier today. Someone was using it legitimately. Let's say that you use box.com and that is your preferred file sharing site in your organization. Then take all the other ones like Dropbox.com, if you can. I mean, even Google Drive, Microsoft Blobs, I should say, whatever they are, and try to block those and alert on them if you can get away with that. Some organizations are like, we can't block a lot of these, but I mean, can you? Or are you sure you can't? Share file, any site that comes up on that LOTS, the LOTS site, try to block those because these threat actors love to use legitimate sites to just upload their stuff and then download it. So once they get their tools into the environment, they start executing their tools. They try to gather additional credentials with tools like Mimikatz, and Rubius is another one that they like to use a lot. And once they've gathered additional credentials and once they've run commands, whether it's like typical Windows commands, like a simple arp-a command to see what other MAC addresses are in the environment, or whether they use something a little more nefarious, which is not technically nefarious by nature, but like Angry IP Scanner, Advanced IP Scanner. These are things that we see IT people use all the time. They like to use those tools in order to find other hosts within the environment. And then that's when they move to lateral movement. Lateral movement meaning they move from their beachhead or their initial host to your other hosts in the environment. And they're looking for all the stuff that they want to steal, basically, right?
mhm,
They'll use defense evasion programs like Gmer, GMER. They'll use Process Hacker. There's a Hitman Pro is another one. There's a couple of other tools that they like to use commonly. Like all the different groups use the same tools. It's kind of funny. They'll try to basically, whether you have an EDR or an antivirus or EPP, whatever you want to call it, on the box, they'll try to bypass that and in order to get their stuff to execute and to run and to be able to move from one host to another. Once they get onto a device where they realize, ooh, there's good stuff here, right? That's when they'll move typically to data exfiltration. So data access and exfiltration.
mhm,
You can check out the SANS Forensics or actually it's called the SANS Windows Forensic Analysis poster. And you can get that at just sans.org/posters.
Okay.
And it's the one that's typically associated with Forensics 500, which is our standard Windows forensic analysis course. And that poster has a couple sections. Like one of them is called File and Folder Opening. And
Mhm.
it denotes the forensic artifacts that will, well, then I guess denote, I'll use the same word again, people trying to access files. And if you hunt through those artifacts, it's a really, really good way of trying to see these ransomware actors accessing your stuff. They'll
Mhm.
use tools like ShareFinder and Sharp Shares and other tools that are prepackaged to allow them to enumerate your network shares and then look for things like, finance, HR, like whatever they're trying to get from you or whatever they can find, basically. And they'll grab that data and then take it out of the environment. And typically, the way they take it out of the environment is you would think, oh, it's some crazy advanced, never heard of this kind of thing. No, they'll use FileZilla and WinSCP are two great examples. And anyone listening right now is probably like, wait a minute, I use that. Like
When, exactly when you said when SCB, that's the most when you kind of hunt through. That's the most common thing that you see, and it's very hard for me uh, to it actually tell, hey, this is something that bad actors could use as well. So this that's interesting. Yeah. So you,
Yes, and they like to package up the data before they take it. They'll use this again, the same tools that we use. They'll bring in or they'll just find in the environment 7-zip. They'll use WinZip. They'll use WinRAR. Very, very common tooling. And once they've packaged the data up, archived the data that they want, then they just ship it out via those common tools. Two other tools to look for within your environments are rclone, RCLONE,
uh,
and you can just go to rclone.org and read about it. It's a wonderful open source tool that allows you to, move data about from different disparate locations. And then one called MegaSync. There's a site called Mega, MEGA, and there's a number of different top level domains for it. Mega.nz, mega.com. There's a ton of them. But you want to block that also because they use MegaSync and they try to get your data synchronized out of the environment also. And then once they've got the data that they want to steal out of your environment, typically they're going to use those for extortion purposes. That's when they'll then move to tampering, as in trying to clear logs so that you can't investigate as well if you're not, shipping those logs off in real time, for example. And then from there, they'll move into impact mode where they'll basically say, okay, well, I'm going to disable shadow copies. I'm going to delete shadow copies. I'm going to go delete all your backups. And then that's when, for the teams that still do it these days,
mhm.
they'll deploy the payload, the actual encryptor, and then encrypt the environment. And then at that point, it's definitely game over.
Yeah, it is. Well, that was really comprehensive. Great, great. So I'll tell you, I started looking into ransomware like 2 years back, and I was actually uh, submitting a talk for FSI SAC on ransomware, and it's so intriguing to me how ransomware has evolved uh, in the last decade itself, like post to 2000s. And uh, I just wanted if you could walk us through, like the viewers, anybody who's new to ransomware, the evolution of ransomware. It's really a fascinating topic how it has evolved so much. Like the big game hunting, then you have the RaaS, and then extortion, and even now it's continuing to evolve. You are continuing to see different extortion techniques and things like that. So it would be good to hear your perspective on that.
Oh yeah. The first accepted known version of ransomware came out in 1989/1990. There was a World Health Organization
Mm,
conference on HIV and AIDS research. And this individual, I don't like to say his name. He's a known individual, but I don't like to say his name and give him credit because it kills me that he did this. He got the list of attendees
mm,
and he sent out floppy disks. And I'm dating people here. I was alive for sure in 1989. I don't know how many of the listeners are like, a floppy disk. What do you mean a floppy disk? Like an old school 5 1/4 floppy, like you go flip, 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 legit floppy, and sent it out. And it was a useful program to
yeah.
track your research. But then after, usually it was around 50 boots of your computer, restarts, logins, whatever it would be. It was a takeover autoexec.bat type of thing. it would basically say, hey, you can't use this computer anymore because you haven't paid for the software. Well, there was no mention of you have to pay for the software, right? So there were a number of researchers who formatted their computers and just lost years and years of research. I mean, there were probably hundreds of years lost because of this silly thing. And that was the first version of ransomware. It directly impacted healthcare.
Yeah.
And starting in the early 2000, I'd say seven or eight, nines, you started to see these fake antivirus programs, and it would be like antivirus 2009, and people would just download them from the internet and be like, "Oh, cool, it's a free antivirus." No, it would lock up your computer and not allow you to utilize your computer unless you paid a ransom. And then eventually we had the proliferation of, like, I call them crypto star because it was like crypto locker was one of the first, crypto wall, there were crypto and then some other word. And those started eventually, instead of just locking down the computer and not letting you provide input to the computer and use it, but encrypting your files. And they would give you a timer and say you have to send a ransom by this date. And if you don't, like, it's going to be bad for you. And that was pretty much what we had until like 2000, I say 15, 16 is when ransomware really kicked off into what we know it as today. And there were two primary things that started. One of them was human operated ransomware, which I refer to as humor, HUMOR.
Mhm.
Microsoft coined the term, but they didn't give us an acronym. So I just had to make my own acronym. So I went with a humor. It's not humorous, but it's human operated.
Mhm.
And that was basically when they decided, we could get a malware specimen ransomware into an environment via a phishing email, but that only encrypts one computer. And we might be able to even weaponize it and make it wormable. And so some of them became wormable in like 2014, 15-ish. And they would spread typically via SMB, like your file shares that were open and things of that nature, port 445 type of stuff in Windows. And it would spread to a couple devices, but they decided, what if we actually conduct an attack just like we see, nation states carrying out, which is what I described earlier, basically, right? Where they get in, they do all these different procedures. And then at the tail end of that, we get to a device that has access to everything else in the environment, which is typically a domain controller. And in the Windows realm is a domain controller. And from there, we deploy the ransomware. And if we do that, we can lock down the entire environment or a large swath of the environment. So that was referred to as human operated ransomware. And that then led to, unfortunately, the development of ransomware as a service, which we just call RaaS or RaaS. People pronounce it differently. But ransomware as a service, some of the developers realized, wait a minute, we can create the ransomware, the malware itself, and we can create the backend for communications, and we can take care of dealing with payments and things of that nature. But then we can provide the ransomware to these, what they ended up calling affiliates.
Mhm.
And so they would just hire people in. They would either hire them or they would have them pay for access to the ransomware. Different groups use different methodologies. And they would then have the affiliates get into the environments, deploy the ransomware, and then once that was done, both sides were taken care of. The ransomware was running, it was communicating back to the control servers, and the affiliates, their job was done because the ransom, is now in play, basically.
Pretty much a
So
plus for everybody.
yes, ransomware as a service is what really opened the gates. And then we had an even bigger series of events in 2021, 22, and 23, where a number of the large ransomware as a service groups had their builders leaked. And so a ransomware builder is something that these RaaS developers decided to make it easier and to make it more turnkey
Mhm.
so that they could create ransomware like on the fly. They could just go, boop, and create ransomware for a different affiliate, provide it to affiliate 1 and 2 and 250 or whatever it is. Once those builders started to be leaked, then other threat actors went, oh, wait a minute. We don't even have to work with a RaaS anymore. We can be our own RaaS because now we have this builder and we can build our own ransomware. So Babook was one of the groups that had their builder leaked out, and that caused a huge problem. And then the Conti source code was leaked out. They were the largest group. I don't remember the exact years right now. I want to say 20 to 22, I believe, is when they were really big.
Right.
And then most recently, Lockbit, unfortunately, which is the #1 group now in terms of attacks.
Mhm.
they had their builder leaked out. And since those builders were leaked, we're seeing more and more and more of these groups come into existence. And what we're finding is a lot of them are just using the source codes and the builders from these other groups. And I believe that unfortunately is going to continue. And I think that our numbers in 2024, as I mentioned previously, January numbers were already higher than 23, which were higher than 21 and 22. And so we're just going to keep seeing more and more of this because more people have access to just make their own group.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the leak, the builder leaks, and that's recently there was a sprout of, I did see a news article that mentioned a sprout of new ransomware actors coming up. I wonder, maybe it could be related to that, but there, yeah, that's definitely a big problem. Uh, so moving on to, so you talked about RaaS. If you could walk us through the RaaS ecosystem, you mentioned affiliates, what other components are involved in a RaaS?
Yeah, so it's an entire ecosystem. It's a business ecosystem. Right in the middle, you have the developers, and they're the ones who develop the actual ransomware. And then you have, to one side, you have the people who get into the environment and carry out the actual attacks. So once they've leased or been given or whatever it is, purchased, lease, provided, as an affiliate status, the ransomware, you have the initial access brokers, the IABs, and their job is to just get into environments. Once they get into environments, they will typically then hand that off to the affiliate. The affiliate on the darknet forums where they communicate with each other, they call them pen testers. Just like we refer to ourselves, on in the red team. I'm a blue teamer myself, but the red teamer's like, yeah, I'm a pen tester. That's what I do for a living. They call them a pen tester. They're the ones who get in and deploy the actual ransomware. Well, as they're doing their thing, they're exfiltrating a bunch of data out of the environment. So there's another role, if you will, in the RaaS ecosystem that's referred to as, there's a couple names for them, but a data manager is
Hmm.
basically what they do. So if I'm an affiliate, I'm not an affiliate, by the way, but let's just say that I'm playing the role of the affiliate and I take out a bunch of data from an environment, like gigs or terabytes, right, of data. A lot of times I'm not even really sure what that data is. So the data manager's job is to go through all that data and find out and go like, that's HR data, that's PHI, that's PCI. Oh, we've got some payment card stuff, and they pull that all out and they then try to determine how they're going to best extort the client. And then you have on the other side of the coin, after the attack has been done, you have the communicator or the negotiators. You have the money mules who will basically clean the money, will launder the money. And, usually it's some type of Bitcoin, or excuse me, it's some type of crypto coin, be it Bitcoin or Monero or whatever it might be. And they'll try to move that around. They sometimes refer to that as tumbling the money so that it can, become quote unquote clean and less trackable. And then you also have like the chasers. And the chaser's job is to basically chase down they call them clients, but they're victims, and to try to get them to pay the ransoms. And so all these different roles come together into this one very large team. And so when we think of ransomware and we think of groups like Lockbit 3.0, we think it's just this one group. It's not. It's this big, large cluster of various groups that all work together in order to cause the destruction and chaos that they really do.
That's really business-like, corporate kind of a interesting. So, so you touched upon IABs earlier. So I was wondering, are IABs and affiliates the same, or can they vary? Are they different entities?
Many times they're different these days because a lot of the affiliates are just allowing the IABs to do what they do, and then they're just buying access from them. There's
Uh,
a number of darknet forums. When I say darknet, I just mean it's on a Tor circuit somewhere. That's all it really means, right? So they're on some darknet forum and they're just selling access to organizations. And they usually won't say the name of the organization because there's a bunch of threat researchers who are embedded into that environment. And so they would just tip off the victim and they'd be like, hey, you've got a huge problem, right? So they stop doing that, but they'll say they're based here. They have this many employees. They work in this type of sector. And then the affiliates go, oh, that'd be perfect for ransomware. and they just buy it off of them. Or sometimes they'll even like trade access in order to maybe split profits, but a lot of times they'll just buy it off of them. Some of the affiliates can get into environments themselves, so they won't necessarily need an IAB whose job is just to get in. But many times we're seeing this interaction between those two groups, and it's working, in this symbiotic way, unfortunately for all of us.
Got it. Got it. Cool. So you touched upon Lockbit. What are the other threat actors we should be concerned about in terms of the ransomware threat actors in 2024? And
There are a ton of them. Give me a moment and I will actually pull up live right now. I have a buddy who runs a wonderful website. It's called ecrime.ch.
mhm,
It is a paid service. So just a heads up. And again, full transparency, I know him. So when I mention that, I'm like, go check his stuff out. It's wonderful. It is wonderful though.
mhm,
But if I look at, for example, just looking at January 2024, and we go look at the groups that have been causing the most damage, we've got Lockbit 3.0, Residia,
mm,
Beyond Leon, a group called Meow, like a cat meows. They're a newer group, by the way. And then one called 3 a.m. They started going pretty crazy not too long ago. If I look at all of 2023, Lockbit will for sure be way out on top. Their numbers far surpass the other groups. So Lockbit is definitely, one to keep an eye on.
mm,
But the other groups that are causing problems are Play Ransomware, Akira, Royal. There's Residius again.
mhm.
This is funny. I see one called INC ransomware, which I'm actually not even familiar with. And that makes me feel weird because I track these groups all the time. Like, what's INC ransomware? Alf V, also known as Black Cat, they've been pretty prolific throughout the year. These groups, they often will change their name, they'll change their branding, they'll move developers between groups.
Mm,
The groups evolve over time, and if anyone is interested in seeing some of these evolutions and exactly what they look like, you can go to for528.com/ecosystem. Just one word, lowercase, ecosystem. And there's also another one called ecosystem 2.
mm.
Those are my shortened links. And if you go there, you'll see a mapping of what the group started as, what they evolved to, and then what they evolved to, and then what they split and branched off into, and then what those evolved to. And it's just a crazy amount of research that went into those. So again, for528.com/ecosystem. That particular link goes to a graphic from Orange Cyber Defense. They're the ones who did the primary work on that, the one that I like the most. And it's just amazing seeing the changes in the group names over time and seeing how there's still a problem all these years later.
Amazing. I'll definitely check that out because, yeah, it's crazy how they rebrand over the years due to law enforcement or other things that may happen. But yeah, it's it's hard to keep track of one when you rebrand into other things. Then it's really crazy.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
so I wanted to touch upon a threat actor, Scattered Spider, that caused a lot of waves last year, and with MGM uh, and apparently Scattered Spider is an affiliate of Black Cat, I think, and I found it very interesting because Scattered Spider is a threat actor that's English speaking, considered to be folks are here. And how is it an affiliate of Black Cat, which is originating in Russia? So that was something that was very interesting to me. But uh, I just wanted to just, if you could touch upon on Scattered Spider as well, because that's kind of making a lot of waves, especially with the swim swapping. That's kind of a new attack vector that came in.
Yes, so I cannot comment on any specific cases involving scattered spider for reasons,
Mhm,
but what I can say is I've done a lot of research on them, and I may or may not have worked some of those cases. And they are a group that started in an organization that it's a very large group, which basically was just called SIM swappers, and there was a subgroup of that called the COM.
mm,
And the COM, they are like some of them are involved in like violence as a service. Like they do things like you can pay them to firebomb a house. Like seriously, like lethal potential stuff. Like they're very childish, they're very young minded, and they're usually very young. They're English speaking. An offset of them became known as Scattered Spider. And so they're also known as Muddled Libra by Palo Alto Unit 42. There's a number of, Microsoft has their own name for them. There's a bunch of different names out there. They specialize in phishing via SMS. So smishing, as it's called, text messages, right?
Right.
And that's a huge problem. And it's very successful because many organizations, the phones, like I have my phone here, this is my personal phone. These days, I don't have to have a work phone because I moved away from incident response. But when I was in incident response, I had a work phone. And many people have work phones that are their own phone.
Yeah.
And that many of them have phones that are not monitored by their employer. Now, luckily, my employer, we had mobile device management installed, and that yeah, awesome, right? But many employers don't do that. So they don't see the messages coming in. They don't see when people tap on those links. They don't see what happens after that tap. They don't see the credentials being input. It's a huge problem. So single factor,
Mm.
um, I was going to say bypass. It's not really bypass. It's single factor. There's nothing to bypass. You just get the credentials, right? That's a problem. And then on top of that, SIM swapping is where this group originated. That's the like the family where they came from. I shouldn't say family. That's they probably see themselves as a family, but that's their original group. And so they have people embedded at the various mobile carriers. I won't say the names, but just whatever country you're in, think of your major large mobile carriers, right? And you're like, this one? Yeah, probably. They have people that will basically just circumvent procedures and do a SIM swap, which means that they'll basically take, my phone, I have a CDMA phone, but technically it's still, I have a SIM associated with the account. And they basically have another phone in their possession, and they will typically just either social engineer the mobile carrier, like call them, and be like, hey, I lost my phone and I need to move it over to this one or whatever. Or they'll just have someone in the store do it for them because they're paying them off. And sometimes they'll actually steal the supervisor pads. They have tablets within the stores where the supervisors are the only ones who can change accounts from one phone to another. And they'll just steal those and literally just run away with it. There's a whole different, there's a whole ecosystem there. But if I have, for example, SMS set up as my MFA multi-factor, then they can SIM swap out, send an SMS phish, smish the account, get the password, and then SIM swap it real quick so that the second factor just goes to a phone that they're holding. And so groups like Scattered Spider are very good at also social engineering help desks and just getting them to remove MFA from accounts and restart it to a different phone or whatever. And I was very saddened when I learned that they had become an affiliate of Black Cat. I don't know how that business relationship started, but if you were to ask me and my opinion, Black Cat saw Scattered Spider and was like, holy crud, they're really good at getting into very secure environments. Let's partner with them. And I think they just jumped on the back. That's what I think. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just my feeling. And so as we see more smishing and MFA bypass and social engineering of help desks move into the ransomware realm, we're going to see even more and more numbers, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yep. So I also wanted to touch upon hunting as well. What are your thoughts on how to hunt for, say, pre-deployment ransomware activity? I know there's a bit of a dwell time for that before ransomware is deployed. So there is an opportunity to hunt before the actual damage is done. So just wanted to gather your thoughts on that as well.
I have a couple preferred favorites.
Mhm.
I like to start as soon as possible. So for RDP, hunting for RDP connectivity from outside IP addresses is very useful. And that can be something as simple in a Windows realm as looking through 4624 event IDs and looking for where the remote IP address is an external IP address. And if basically saying not 10 dot, not 172, when you get the idea. And then from there, identifying where are these people logging in remotely from, and then taking those IPs and saying, is that legitimate? Should that be happening? And RDP should first off be disabled on, of course, your critical servers and things of that nature. Like your domain controller should not have RDP, let alone the ability on the firewall side to RDP from the outside. Like, stop it. You should be using a jump server to get to your domain controller. But anywho, That's one thing that I like to do. Another thing is basically hunting around for attachments that should not be coming into the environment. So like a .iso file or just a .url attached to an email. Those should be blocked in the email gateway, but you should also be hunting for those to make sure they're not hitting your environment and coming in and being downloaded via Chrome or Firefox or Outlook or something like that. So
Mhm.
that's some of the initial stuff. And then right when these threat actors get in, the things that they like to do, right? Before they try to steal your data, because you're already too late if you catch them at that point, right? You say, oh, look, WinSCP just transferred 17 gigabytes of data on this computer it's never been installed on, and it's not someone in IT. What's that about? Like, that's way too late. But looking into where they like to put their tools.
Mhm.
So one of the things I like is if you have the ability to see command lines that are executed within your environment, meaning you have like either Microsoft Sysmon installed or you have an EDR or an XDR solution, is look for the environment variable called ComSpec, COMSPEC. And
Mhm.
typically on the command line, it'll actually be percent ComSpec percent. That refers to the command interpreter, but threat actors love to use that as opposed to putting in cmd.exe into a malicious command, right? So if you hunt for that showing up in your logs, a lot of times it'll be a fairly high fidelity indicator.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
beyond that, they like to start again. And then beyond that, what they like to do is they like to drop files into certain folders within the environment. A great example of that is C:/perf logs,
Mhm.
PERF logs. That's the performance logs folder, which should never, and I mean never, have a .exe, a .dll, a .bat, a .ps1. Hunt for those things. In fact, many Windows systems have nothing in perf logs whatsoever. And so if you find anything in there that's not just a .text or a .log file, like what is that? Why is that there in the first place? And then there are a number of other places where you should be hunting in your organization, like the app data environment variable. And app data basically links to C users, the current username, and then app data, and then roaming. And then inside of there, if you find executables inside of there, some communications programs like Teams and Slack, actually a bunch of them technically, will put their executables in there. But for the most part, if you find .exes, .dlls, .bats, .ps1s, things like that, it's something you want to look into.
Right.
And you also want to look for those early discovery tools that they like to use, like Advanced IP Scanner and Angry IP Scanner. Those are two very, very common ones that they like to use.
Mhm.
Another one is adfind.exe. It's just adfind.exe. It's a tool that's been around since at least the early 2000s. It's a wonderful tool to run LDAP queries against an Active Directory database. And many IT professionals have used it over the years, but ransomware actors love that tool. You can actually go to for528.com/adfind, and it takes you to a great article from thedeferreport.com, one of my favorite websites, by the way, for learning about ransomware and how it works. And you can find some details on how to detect adfind and things of that nature. And another thing is Cobalt Strike. Hunting for Cobalt Strike in any way, shape, or form, in any capacity that you can. They use it so commonly. But even more so, RMMs, remote monitoring and maintenance programs like AnyDesk, Splashtop, Atera. There's a number of them out there. If you want to learn more about RMMs, you can go to for528.com/RMM. And there's also RMM2 and RMM3 and RMM4. And there's a lot of them, right? I have a lot of shortened links to those. And that's because these actors are realizing, why do we need to run something like Cobalt Strike, which antivirus might pick up, right? EPP, XDR, whatever. Whereas we could just install AnyDesk.
Yeah.
That's what the Conti team gave their affiliates. They gave them a play-by-play manual, and it was just like, just install AnyDesk and just use that.
Mhm.
Nothing against the RMM organizations or companies, because they allow many IT professionals around the world to do their jobs. It's just unfortunate that a lot of these ransomware actors love those RMMs. So let's say that you and your organization say, we don't approve any RMMs, then block them and report on them. And if you go to those links /RMM through /RMM4, you'll get a number of different names of the RMMs. You'll get the process names where they execute under. You'll get artifacts. RMM3 is like a 187-page PDF, phenomenal work from I think it's the McAfee team, where they break down, just a ton of things you can look for within your environment to see if they're using those tools. And that would be my biggest tip these days, is look for RMMs that you don't use or that should not be used in your environment.
Yeah. I did see Scatter Spider using a data log in one of the campaigns and Lockbit as well. So yeah,
Yep.
RMM. All right. Final question. How do you see the ransomware threat landscape evolving in 2024 and beyond?
I see even more groups being created. I see many of them using these leaked builders and or using those to build their own ransomware, because they could basically just pull apart the code, disassemble, decompile, and then find out how things quote unquote should be done. I also see, and I'm really, really hoping that this is incorrect, but I also see more and more groups that are ransomware affiliated working with groups like Scattered Spider, who are really good at getting in via smishing and SIM swapping and social help desk engineering. When we start to see the numbers from RDP and email going lower, and we see the number of help desk social engineering and smishing going higher, we're going to have more and more and more of these cases. And it's unfortunate. I really, really hope that's not the case. Another thing that I see that violence is, I believe, and a number of us in the community believe, that violence is like physical harm. Violence is going to start to become
Mm,
more of a thing that we see with ransomware in terms of extortion. Telling someone, hey, we're going to release all your data, that's one thing. But if all of a sudden your headquarters is firebombed, literally, and human lives are at risk, that could be a huge problem. And I think that we're already seeing a bit of these things. There was, for example, a hospital whose ransom extortion kind of negotiations said, hey, we're going to SWAT some of your customers and your clients, which basically means putting in a fake call to law enforcement and getting them to react to the scene, and bad things can happen with that. So I really, really hope that doesn't come to pass, because that's just disgusting to me. But I fear that we're on the verge of that.
yeah, great, great. It was great talking to you, Ryan. Thank you again for being on this podcast. And uh, anybody who's listening would really, really love what we just discussed. So
Good. Thank you for having me.
thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Mhm.